There are decisions you have been standing in front of for years, not because you do not know what they are, because you know exactly what they are, and the knowing is precisely what makes them impossible. You can see the decision clearly. You can see what it would require. You can trace the full shape of what changes if you make it, and what remains the same if you do not. And you stand there, day after day, in the specific paralysis of someone who understands too much about the cost of choosing, and not nearly enough about the cost of staying exactly where you are. Carl Jung called this the threshold phenomenon, the place where the conscious mind has arrived at the edge of transformation, and the unconscious, still loyal to the architecture of survival it spent years constructing, refuses to take the final step. Not because you are weak, because the decision is not really a decision about the future. It is a decision about the past, about whether you are finally willing to let it stop running you. The antagonist in this story arrived before the decisions did, before you even knew there were decisions to make. They arrived in the form of an environment, a relationship, a dynamic so early and so formative that it did not feel like influence. It felt like reality. Jung described this as the original persona formation, the moment in childhood or adolescence or early relational experience when the psyche looks at its environment and makes a catastrophic and completely unconscious calculation. The calculation is this: if I am fully myself, I will not survive this. And so the adaptive self is born, the version that learned which parts of its interior life were acceptable and which were not, which needs were safe to have, and which would destabilize the people whose stability was necessary for survival. The version that became over time so skilled at reading the room, so extraordinarily attuned to what each environment required, that it forgot the original self was ever a separate thing. And the three decisions, the ones the empath has been standing in front of for years, are the decisions that would finally require them to choose the original self. Over the adaptive one, for the first time, the first decision, the decision to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what you are. The empath carries an extraordinary faith in the power of communication. If they can just find the right words, the right framing, the right moment where the other person is open enough to actually hear what is being said, something will shift. The person who chronically misunderstands them will finally understand. The relationship that has never quite fit will finally find its alignment. The dynamic that cost them so much will finally reorganize itself into something sustainable. Jung called this the compulsive search for the witness, the unconscious drive of the person whose authentic self was never properly seen to keep reaching, in relationship after relationship, for the specific experience of being recognized, of having someone finally look at them and say, "Yes, I see you exactly as you are, and I am not leaving." The antagonist in this pattern is not the people who fail to provide this. It is the belief that providing it is their responsibility. The false self of the explainer is built entirely around the premise that if the empath communicates well enough, clearly enough, patiently enough, the recognition they have been searching for will finally arrive from outside. Jung said this belief is the most elegant trap the psyche ever constructs, because it is built on something real. Communication does matter, clarity does help, but the recognition the empath is searching for, the deep, unconditional, "I see all of you and I am still here" recognition, cannot be produced by explanation. It can only be received by someone who was already capable of offering it. And the decision, the one the empath keeps standing in front of and retreating from, is the decision to stop spending their life explaining themselves to people who are not capable, and to redirect that energy toward finding the ones who are. The second decision, the decision to let something end that is not working, without waiting for permission from the thing itself. There is a specific kind of relationship the empath stays in, long past the point of obvious incompatibility, not because they do not see the incompatibility, because leaving without a resolution feels like abandonment, feels like giving up on someone who needs them, feels like the specific moral failure of a person who was built to see the best in others, choosing to stop seeing it. Jung identified this as the savior archetype in its most exhausted form. The empath who cannot leave because leaving means accepting that their love, their extraordinary capacity for presence and understanding and patient, sustained care was not enough. The antagonist here is not the person they are staying for. It is the narrative, The story the empath has been telling themselves about what their staying means. That it means loyalty, depth, the specific quality of love that does not abandon people when things become difficult. Jung said that this narrative, however sincere, is often a persona worn over a simpler and more difficult truth, that the empath is not staying for the other person. They are staying because leaving requires them to grieve, not just the relationship, but the version of themselves that believed their love was sufficient to transform what refused to be transformed, the version that needed, on some level, to be the person whose love was powerful enough to change things. And the decision is the decision to grieve that version, to release the story, to let the ending happen without waiting for it to make sense first, without waiting for the other person to acknowledge what should have been different, without waiting for the resolution that was never coming, to simply let it be over and trust that the grief on the other side of that decision is not the end of something, but the beginning of the life that was waiting for the space the story was taking up. The third decision, the most interior one, the most difficult, the decision to stop treating your own needs as a problem to be managed. Jung documented this pattern with more precision than almost any other in his clinical work. The empath who experiences their own needs not as natural, legitimate, ordinary human requirements for sustenance and care and reciprocal presence, but as inconveniences, embarrassments. Evidence of a neediness they were taught, somewhere very early, was unbecoming of someone with their capacity for giving. The shadow carries all of it. Every need that was swallowed, every want that was edited before it could be spoken. Every moment the empath assessed what they required and decided, automatically and without examination, that the assessment itself was selfish. And the false self, the version that gives without asking, that shows up without conditions, that exists in every relationship as the one who needs nothing, has been performing a kind of psychic heroism that is slowly and certainly destroying the person underneath it. Jung called this the martyrdom of the invisible self, the specific suffering of a person who has made themselves so comprehensively available to everyone else's needs that their own have nowhere to go except inward, where they become, over time, everything the wound always whispered: proof of too much, proof of not enough, proof of a fundamental unlovability that can only be managed through the continued suppression of the evidence. The decision is not to become demanding, not to transform the selflessness into selfishness. It is the far more difficult and far more interior decision to simply stop treating your own needs as lesser than the needs of everyone around you, to allow yourself to want what you want, without the immediate accompanying shame, to say what you need without the reflexive 3-paragraph apology that follows it, to exist in the full, unedited, unapologetically present reality of a person who has requirements, and to treat those requirements as legitimate, as worthy of being met by yourself first, and by the people you choose to be in relationship with second. What happens to the antagonists, the environments and relationships and dynamics that were sustained by the empath's inability to make these 3 decisions? Jung's answer was precise. They enter what he called psychic bankruptcy, the psychological state of a system that has been drawing from an external source and has never developed its own. The person who benefited from the empath's endless explaining finds themselves, in the absence of it, confronting their own refusal to understand. The relationship the empath finally left begins the slow and undeniable process of revealing to everyone involved what it actually was. And the antagonist who relied on the empath's suppression of their own needs faces, in the empath's absence, the specific emptiness of someone who organized their entire relational life around another person's depletion. Jung called this the return of the repressed at the systemic level, the moment the entire architecture of a dynamic that required the empath's self-abandonment to function begins to collapse, not from the outside, from within, because the truth the system was built to avoid has nowhere left to be sent. The empath who finally makes these 3 decisions does not become someone unrecognizable. They become someone returned to the 3 things the decisions required them to reclaim: the right to stop explaining their existence to people incapable of witnessing it, the right to let things end without waiting for permission, the right to need simply ordinarily without apology, and to treat that needing as the most natural thing in the world. Because it is. It was always the most natural thing in the world. The only unnatural thing was the years spent pretending otherwise. Jung said that individuation is not a destination. It is a series of threshold crossings, each one requiring the empath to choose themselves over the adaptive self that was built to survive by never quite doing that. These three decisions are three of those thresholds, and the empath who crosses them does not arrive on the other side as someone who has finally figured out how to be less. They arrive as someone who has finally stopped apologizing for being exactly, precisely, irreversibly themselves.